Today's event is the fourth of our public program as part of a body of work that we've called Rehearsing Freedoms, and it's really about how we practice getting free together. We know we are what we practice, and we want to practice new ways. We're often either there's no neutral practice. We're either practicing towards something or away. So what are the ways that we can rehearse in a non-reactionary way towards liberation and freedom and thriving? And for us at Healing Justice London, we particularly are embedded in the work of health and healing justice. So how can we practice new futures, new infrastructures, new ways of accessing flourishing for all life, and how can we do that in really practical and material ways? And so what you're seeing this year is six public programs, and this is the fourth one where we're exploring the people's medicine, plant medicine, psychedelics, and healing justice. And we've got two more, which we'll share details towards the end, and it's also on our social media. And then in October the 11th, save the date, and November the 11th, so it's 10, 11, 11, 11. Those are sweet dates. We've got a month-long pan-London public rehearsal of different ways that we're going to try and rehearse getting free together, from workshops to skill shares to creative and social practice. So do look out for that and join us in those rehearsals. In terms of today's event, it's truly an honor for me, and I feel like I've personally been waiting a long time to have this conversation out loud, and especially with the folks here who are leading in this work, and especially as global majority folks in a field or a context that is white dominated, and really to be able to explore how we access healing, health, but also new visions and new possibilities through plant medicine and psychedelics, and opening up those spaces, or reconnecting with those spaces, or repairing those spaces, not just in the context of medicine and health, but also spirituality, recreation, multiple different ways in which that can open up and create new possibilities, and also holding the very real realities in which this is being navigated, of white supremacy culture, racial capitalism, neoliberalism, all these different ways in which our access, our ability to know and feel and sense health in very practical ways and healing is denied for so many marginalized folks. So this is really an opportunity for us to explore together, to get curious, to hear from some incredible people whose practices are interdisciplinary and are some of the leading voices that we should be listening to and being inspired by. So without any further ado, I'm just really honored to kick it off. And so I'm going to actually invite each speaker to introduce themselves and share a bit about what their journey has been to plant medicine or psychedelics, and how you came to this work. And we could start with Camille. So I'm going to hand over to you, Camille.
Thanks, Farzana. It's a real treat to be with you all. Yeah, I'm excited for this. So my name's Camille Sapara Barton, and I'm a social imagineer. I operate a lot in the realm of social change, thinking about creating networks of care and livable futures. So sometimes I work as a facilitator, sometimes a consultant or educator across the spaces of embodied social justice, grief, pleasure, and drug policy. So from about 2017, I've worked within programs for psychedelic therapists in training, and also closely with MAPS, where Ismail, who you'll meet in a bit, currently one of the main people at MAPS, who have been sort of the clinical sponsor for MDMA psychotherapy. And we've worked over the years to try and ensure that these clinical trials and the mainstreaming of psychedelics will actually have enough cultural competency for global majority communities, and actually be accessible in various ways that it needs to be for those who choose to enter at the medical model side of things. But in terms of how I came into plant medicine or came into contact with psychedelics? Well, it's been a quite interesting journey for me. I first started working with psychedelics or recreational drugs in general, mostly MDMA and ketamine, about 14, because I had pretty severe depression, and I didn't have a lot of support or access points at that time to navigate that. And so it was really the context of raves that I was able to kind of access substances that were helping me navigate my depression and suicidal ideation, and kind of connect to some amount of pleasure that enabled me to keep going and keep, tending to trying to be a student and a child in the family context and various responsibilities that, I was trying to navigate at that time. At that point in my life, I wasn't aware there was a deeper sort of childhood trauma context, because I hadn't remembered those pieces. But that was the entry point for me, just moving towards pleasure and moving towards what was available to help me stay here, stay alive. And later on, I ended up living in California, specifically in Oakland, and I was working in a restorative justice school with a lot of student population that were really living with the day-to-day violence of militarized policing and the war on drugs. So it was the first time I'd really seen it in that context before. And it, was very painful, and to sort of see what a lot of people are navigating and just how pervasive this is. And at the same time as living in California and seeing the kind of US lens of it in daily life, my brother was being impacted by it in the UK. He, has had many incidents with the police due to suspicion of cannabis possession. I think many Black people and brown folks as well in the UK have this experience of being harassed or stopped and searched under the guise of potentially having cannabis. And this sort of spiraled into many traumatic incidents for him, and ultimately, mental health experiences that he's still navigating now. So, it just kind of affected my life in a very big way, even though I was living in a totally different part of the world. So I got more and more interested about what this is, how it impacts people, as well as continuing in my own kind of personal journey of trauma recovery, working with plant medicines and psychedelics, and then, getting into the advocacy part of it. So I suppose it's quite entangled with my life now. I think I'll leave it there. That's a little bit of an overview for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for being also so generous with your personal context and living experience, as well as your practice and profession. I'm going to now invite Ismail. Do you want to go next?
Happy to. Thank you so much for the invitation to join. I'm really honored and grateful to be here with you, Farzana, and with Camille and Akua and Darren and this amazing support team. So I just want to appreciate you all for being here and making this possible. And of course, for the audience, we just hit 200, I just noticed. So congrats, everyone. Camille, thanks for starting us off. My name is Ismail Lourido Ali. I also go by Izzy. Sometimes I put 3 Z's in it when I'm feeling spicy. I'm calling in from Oakland, California, here on the West Coast of California. And I'm really grateful to be here and be part of this conversation. It seems like, as you said, Farzana, kind of a culmination, but also a continuation, but also kind of a new beginning of aspects of the conversation that I think have been happening in small pockets and in forums and probably over WhatsApp and maybe Signal over some time. So I'm just really honored to be here and to speaking to some of this crew from as far away as I am. In the spirit of introduction, I'll just share maybe a couple of minutes about myself, just for context, and we'll be glad to kind of dive into the conversation as we move forward. So I grew up in Fresno, California, which is a smaller, maybe medium-sized town in the Central Valley of California. My parents are both immigrants. My father was born in Delhi and raised in Karachi, and my mother was born in Cali, Colombia, and they met at a local university at their first ever Halloween party, actually, many, many years ago. I grew up with two younger brothers. We were raised Muslim. My father's Muslim and my mother converted later in their marriage. But we were close to and involved in a highly culturally diverse, kind of intentionally and also just incidentally, and religiously diverse environment. So I spent a lot of my youth in conversations about religion and culture and community in the various intersections about how those worked. Of course, as an American in America, I also, as a young person, was highly impacted by 9/11 and by, more probably relevantly for me at the time, the subsequent kind of domestic and foreign policy actions that the United States government and related governments took in the years following. So I sometimes say that I was politically radicalized without my consent, or politically socialized without my consent as a young person, experiencing and being in relation to the surveillance and kind of the aftermath of that with friends and family who were in the countries that were being occupied by the United States and by the other allied governments involved. So it was really that area of like surveillance and how we navigated these very sensitive kind of geopolitical questions that opened my eyes to kind of the political lens that I was part of. And kind of not so different from what Camille just shared, also found psychedelics and other substances as a pretty young person now, over 15 years ago, sort of in a search for something that would help me connect to something more clearly spiritual, was kind of vaguely the thing that I was looking for. I'm sure there are elements of escapism. I'm sure that as a very angsty and depressed and disillusioned, 15, 16-year-old, I also needed something to kind of balance out the disillusionment that I experienced, having been raised in a particular cultural context, and then having like all of that turned, at least in my experience, against me for a period of time, and have spent a lot of time since then working on understanding identity and how we utilize that and how that's utilized and how that's brought into conversations around oppression, surveillance, specifically civil liberties and civil rights, and increasingly drug policy. So started really kind of actively engaging with the topic outside of just raves and festivals in my early 20s, and began to come into contact with traditional practices, indigenous and mestizo practices, hybrid practices that brought in transpersonal psychotherapy and Western therapeutic modalities with shamanic and esoteric modalities, and have been kind of part of and engaging with that mestizo mixed modality tradition for about the last decade. And currently work as the director of policy and advocacy at the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, lovingly known as MAPS. Have a background in law and working kind of the intersection of legal strategy, legislative analysis, community building, and figuring out exactly like how to both move away from the capital W, capital D war on drugs, kind of as we know it, but not just to divest from that, but actually figuring out, with the help of so many people, including some of the folks in this room, or alongside them at least, how do we design a post-prohibition environment that considers the legal compliance, consumer safety, quality control, all the market dynamics, like all of the things that kind of come with the process of bringing something into the above ground. So I like to think of myself as a little bit of a support system, as part of this team of support systems for this new paradigm. And I just want to appreciate Healing Justice London for the frame of rehearsing. That was actually a new concept to me when I met Farzana and when this was introduced to me. So this idea of kind of rehearsing feels so accurate, because it is us practicing what we know to be possible, even within kind of the frame that currently exists. And now I kind of see the role of psychedelics and plant medicine not necessarily as the end goal in itself, although there's an aspect of freeing the medicine and the plants and the cultures and the traditions that's valuable in and of itself, but also as kind of a channel to these larger questions around freedom and liberty and sovereignty that I think that this whole series has been kind of concerning itself with. So grateful to get into the weeds of the policy dynamics, which maybe can happen at a later time, but I'll start there and just appreciate you all. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And thank you for also bringing in so many facets of what this effort and this work and paradigm shift is about. I'm going to next invite Akua to speak.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Farzana. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's wonderful to be a part of this panel. So I work full-time as a dressmaker. I'm also a psychedelic guide, and I speak publicly about the therapeutic uses of psychedelics. I'm hearing that my audio is very low. So I hope it's higher now and I shall speak up.
Great.
Wonderful. My story with psychedelics is really in two parts. When I was younger, I was part of the kind of 1990s rave scene, discovered MDMA, ecstasy, but for me, it wasn't a long-lasting thing. It was really kind of like my early 20s to mid 20s. It wasn't even that long. And then I was kind of done with it, didn't think about it again. I actually figured out today that my last recreational use of drugs was actually New Year's Eve, 1999. So that was that. And then what happened was about 6 years ago, my son was groomed into county lines, drug dealing sort of, I don't want to say gang, but groups of young people. And it was a very stressful time. I found myself really, really depressed, unable to really find the right kind of help for myself or for him. And psychedelics came in because I was looking for something that would work fast for me, and just needing that, fast therapeutic help was what brought me to psychedelics. So first with iboga, and then with psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and then with MDMA. And after some years of working on myself, I was able to persuade my son to also come and work with medicines, MDMA and psilocybin, and he was able in a weekend to come out of the whole situation of selling drugs, being away from London, being away from home, selling in what's known as crack dens, but they're usually vulnerable people's houses that have been taken over by these groups. And since then, I've managed to happily, I would say now, work with medicines to help more people who are coming from kind of coercive situations, cults, and just people who really need to, they feel they need to change their mind in an effort to be happy. And I'm really excited by the promise of psychedelics because it's not just mental health. There are people in my family who are using it for lung disorders. There are so many inflammation-related illnesses that are helped by psilocybin magic mushrooms. So I'm super excited as well to be on this call for us to really delve into the promise of these medicines.
Thank you so much, Akua, and also for bringing in the facet of kind of physical health as well to this dimension of it. Darren, over to you. Welcome.
Hello. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Darren Barton, also known as Darren Springer. I'm an educator, psychedelic researcher, mycologist, and what that basically means is I have a background in educating, working primarily with young people in creative arts, music, filmmaking. I eventually evolved into working in horticulture and work with young people, hard to reach communities as they're often described, in building up sustainable food enterprise projects. So basically teaching them how to grow food, to sell food. And during that time and period of studying horticulture, I became more intrigued and fascinated by fungi and mushrooms and mycology and permaculture and some other, cultivation techniques and approaches. But the more I found out about mushrooms, the more I became an advocate for, educating people about the role they play in this bioorganism we call planet Earth, not just as a food, not just as a psychedelic or a medicine, but also as something that, creates soil and, just kind of giving it its place, its value in culture, in at least the area where I felt was important, because there was a lack of information about mushrooms and fungi and the role they played. So for the last 12 plus years, I've been an advocate for mushrooms, and mushroom cultivation is the thing I do, and teach and educate people about how to build a relationship with this living and breathing organism. And, that's part of the journey. And in addition to how I started, engaging in psychedelics, it was primarily, I would say, a lifelong journey of just wanting to, I guess, see the unseen. I wanted to know the unknown. And on that journey of research and doing my Googles before Googles, I was looking into different practices and applications that I guess my people, by way of my heritage, were engaging in prior to, slavery and colonialism and the various, teachings and educations we got in being in other parts of the world. So I was very much interested in African practices and sciences and, what we were doing in present as well as ancient Africa. And I just bring all of that into the fold of my teachings. And then as I, in my late 30s, or should I say early 30s, really started to build a relationship with psychedelics, because culturally, where I'm come from and where the people I'm around, psychedelics wasn't a thing that we engaged in. It was pretty much what the white boys I went to school with were dealing with. And me personally, we had our cultural, privileges that we tapped into, which was primarily weed and alcohol and stuff like that. So for me, psychedelics was definitely not a thing that I was, engaging in through my teens. But as I entered adulthood, learning and studying more about, the African sciences and spiritual systems, I learned that there were, plants and mushrooms involved in this stuff. And I couldn't dismiss it anymore or put it to the side. So I had to kind of research and eventually partake in these substances. And after my, building a relationship, I'll say primarily with mushrooms, I realized that I personally was starting this journey as a tool of navigation. You're going to hear me refer to mushrooms and plant technologies as just that, technologies. And I was using it to support me on my spiritual development, my spiritual journey. And as I built a relationship with mushrooms, I came more into the understanding that there was a healing element to it that I was gaining from mushrooms. And there was a self-development element, that was complementary to the path that I was on where it was kind of enhancing or complementing my lifestyle choices at that time. So I realized that it was definitely beneficial for me. I felt that immediately it would be beneficial for my family members. It would definitely be beneficial to my brethren, my homies, my partners in crime, my friends, including some of my foes. I just felt like, this was a thing that I had needed and many people have been asking for. So with that, I studied more, delved in more. I came into contact with a teacher, elder of mine, Kalindi Iyi. That's Kalindi Iyi, Kilindi, last name Iyyi. That's for everybody to go and do your research. And since then, I've been supporting him and others in, spreading the spore, sharing information about psychedelics, their relationship to history and culture from an indigenous perspective. So that's me. That's what I do and bring to the table.
Thank you so much, Darren. And I really love the Google before Google, because it really is that kind of navigation tool, also in my experience. For myself, I, for about over the last 10 years in different ways, plant medicine, I felt, and I mean, a lot of you on the call know me, that I'm someone who really connects with my spiritual dimension and access. And so in different ways was recurring, but I wasn't listening. And I was even seeing plants in dreams calling me, and I was refusing to attend to the calling. And then I got physically very sick. And that was really when I first worked with the medicine around this potential surgery that I was going to have that was quite life-changing. And it really was the thing that finally took me to the plant medicine. And even when I got to the medicine, they were like, we told you to come and you weren't listening. This was the only way you were going to come. So this is how I arrived at working with plant medicine. And from that first kind of interaction over the years, a lot of what my relationship with psychedelics and plant medicine has been around deep, for myself, complex trauma, and also being someone who was extremely disassociative and navigating a lot of survivorhood and trying to find ways in which I could inhabit my body and also access connection, not just within myself, but also beyond. And this was amongst other things that I was doing, like somatic practices and other things, a place that I could really access some of that. And as someone who's immediate intimate network and family has folks who have been institutionalized, who navigate mental distress and suicidal ideation, it was also a space where, after journeys particularly around myself, was also, and Akua was one of my guides for those journeys, doing it, being able to do that kind of much more familial work, healing with the family, going into those spaces and understanding what was going on and accessing what was happening in those spaces, and how I could also bring for myself a more humanized approach, a less pathologized approach, how I could hold more context and insight, and also that there was a lot of things that could happen in the unseen, and I could bring into that space and work with. And so it's been both a journey of physical health, navigating and finding support around trauma, and that's also ongoing, but also then this element, which I'll touch on a bit later, of like also in my practice as someone who is working in visionary realms, and how we use, I love how Darren talks about the kind of navigation tool, but also as a visioning tool, as a tool for time travel. And from those of you that coexist and are part of our community, we often talk about time traveling as visionary practice. We don't have the conditions. I know Marai is on the call, and Marai is our dream time traveler, who says we often don't have the conditions that we want to build in. So we have to time travel between what we are calling in, what we're wanting to move towards, and what we have right now. And I've recently, in my last high dose journey, really was in the time traveling space, and how we synthesize realities and create new paradigms. And that felt really exciting. And I will park there. So this is my way into this work. I actually want to now open up to the next question, and this is really to give us a bit more reframing and context about what's happening here in the UK and beyond. So I'm going to invite Camille to maybe share a bit about what is happening in the UK legal context. What are we talking about when we're talking about psychedelics, the war on drugs, to just kind of really open it up for folks who are completely new to this conversation.
Thank you, Farzana. So we are in a moment where psychedelics and plant medicine is being talked about a lot in the mainstream. So I think it can be a little bit confusing maybe to understand what the legal context is. So to start off with, in the UK currently, most drugs are still illegal, including things like psilocybin or magic mushrooms, LSD, ketamine, MDMA. Most of these are class A, which means they're kind of in the highest category that's meant to be about the most dangerous or illicit substances. Oftentimes, these things aren't scientifically backed up. It's not that these things actually have the most harm on the body, but that's how they've been classified since 1971, where we had the Misuse of Drugs Act that came into law in the United Kingdom. So prior to this, there was quite a different model around how drug use was kind of navigated in the UK. Akua might speak to this a bit more later, but there was what we now call the sort of British model, that was an alternative before 1971, So what that meant is that if you were a heroin user, you could actually go to the pharmacy. There's only a few pharmacies, mostly in central London, and you could get a prescription for your heroin. You'd also get clean needles to use. And generally people who had addiction, it was a small community in that time, were seen as folks to be helped, not punished. And so there was a whole system in Britain that was quite different to what we've kind of moved into, and what we see in the United States and countries where there's more prohibition and kind of punishment-based approaches to people who use drugs. And so with the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1971, the police got a lot more powers to stop and search people, to harass people on suspicion of drug possession. And for many of us, you know, might remember family members or maybe ourselves or loved ones experiencing a lot of harassment and in the form of stop and search from the police, usually in relation to cannabis or suspicion of possession of cannabis, but that would often be very racially motivated and really an excuse to harass, intimidate, criminalize, and unfortunately at times kill people of the majority in the United Kingdom. So yeah, we are definitely in a situation where drugs are still very much illegal, but there's a very different way that this impacts people, right? So we're talking about plant medicines and psychedelics today, but in reality, most people are not being incarcerated for using those. And as Darren already spoke to, a lot of the people we associate as using those drugs tend to be white people, or we think of the hippie movements in the 1960s, where these substances kind of became very mainstream in the West anyway. But for Black people, global majority communities, it's tended to be cannabis as the thing that's actually led to a lot of incarceration and convictions. Even though white people also use cannabis, there hasn't been an equal amount of kind of punishment. So I'm going to just do some signposting to a report that's great to check out. It's from an organization called Release, who are amazing. I'm going to put this in the chat, but I don't know if I can actually send it to the whole audience. So I'm going to hope that the tech team can help with this. But Release are the kind of UK's main centre for drug law and expertise. So if you or anyone you know has an issue with the police because of possession of drugs, or you have any questions, they actually have a free hotline you can call with a legal team that can give you advice about what your rights are. And they have lots of great projects, but they also have policy papers which really clearly show that the war on drugs in the UK context is very much a tool of social and racial control, because it's not being used across the board for all people. It's very much being targeted at communities, the majority communities in particular. So this paper in the chat, The Colour of Injustice, was the most recent one they did. It has data from 2016-17, so it's a little while on now, but they've had one more that's come out in 2020 around drug use in the pandemic generally, which kind of says the rates of stop and search haven't really changed for people. And so I guess, yeah, to sort of wind it up for now, there is a lot of good evidence from Release and others that in the UK and in other contexts, it is something that's being used to criminalize, harass, and incarcerate a majority people. And it's not really about the substances themselves being necessarily worse than alcohol, even, because alcohol actually can have a much worse effect on the body than many of these things. But nonetheless, these policies have been used for many decades now to great detriment for our communities. So while we're in this moment of psychedelics, you know, being in more and more in the mainstream and there being Netflix documentaries, it's important, I think, to hold both, that yes, these substances are now being researched in clinical trials in the US, in the UK, in many countries around the world. And there's a lot of promise for not just therapeutic or healing potential, but in many other areas as well. but we have to still hold the reality that the war on drugs is still ongoing and people are still being criminalized for this. And we have to be very mindful of how we navigate keeping ourselves safe and just having as much harm reduction information as possible, because the things we're seeing in the media are not necessarily giving us all the information around that. The last thing I'll say before passing over is Keir Starmer, the current Labour Party leader, it's not my favorite at all, has been saying some kind of tough on drugs, tough on crime things recently in talks. So it's definitely a bit of a political hot potato that's been used by various people, but he seems to be using that at the moment potentially as a way to kind of gain more popularity, which is quite, concerning in a moment where we want to be moving towards more decriminalization and less of these policies that are going to be used to criminalize our communities. So I'll leave it there for now and pass. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Camille. And Camille also has a great piece on harm reduction and anti-racism. We can put it into the chat, and folks also want to deepen and explore that. I'm going to now invite Akua to expand on this.
Hi, thanks. I think first of all, I'd like to thank Camille, because she really opened my eyes to this huge area, really to do with the law and drugs and how it connects to psychedelics. And I can recommend a really good book called Drug Wars by an ex-policeman. His name just escapes me, but if you put it in, it's a really good book that really goes through the history of drugs in the UK and the law, and how we've ended up in the situation that we're in. Neil Woods, that's his name. Thanks, Camille. And I think that it shows that there's actually a lot of promise, because we're not really asking for something that hasn't been done before. We've had more years of not criminalizing people who were addicted to drugs or just have an issue in their lives that means that they're medicating using different substances than your doctor would prescribe for you. So I think in that way, it really helps us to see that there is another way and it's nothing new. So that's my main thing about it, really, is encouraging people to look at his work and just look at how drugs were seen in the UK before the 80s. I think a lot of people like me would be really surprised that it was seen as a public health issue rather than a law enforcement issue. And in saying that, I would definitely say that in my case, when we were going through the problems that I was having with my son, I was really, really lucky to have social workers and people in the police who were very, very sympathetic to us and really helpful. But at the same time, it wasn't like that across the board. So we were exceptionally lucky to have people who were really in our corner. And it, you know, I saw how difficult it actually really, really is at the moment, because if you're not lucky enough to have people in your corner, then you could really end up in a very, very difficult situation. So yeah, my big thing is for everyone who's interested to just educate themselves some more about how the laws have changed over time, and to look at especially at what was happening in this country in the 50s, 60s and 70s before the war on drugs.
Thank you so much, Akua, and also for bringing out that public health angle that is, I think, news for lots of folks on the call. Ismail, do you want to come through?
Beeping in, can you hear me? Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Camille and Akua, for that context. It's weird, it's wild to hear the cycles that we go through, especially in policymaking, when there's like an attempt to do something because there's a belief that that new policy that's actually really old policy will give us a different outcome than the last time we tried that thing. And both in personal healing work and journeys, and also apparently also in politics and policy, you have to just sometimes keep coming back to the same cycle, to the same point until that thing is finally learned, and then you can move on. But yeah, Camille, what you were saying was just reminding me of kind of, conversations that we've had over many years now around how, as we think about how to dream of a post-prohibition context or a future in which criminalization and access to care, or criminalization is reduced and access to care is increased, it's always a good reminder to reflect on what's been tried and what hasn't, and what's been tried under what circumstances. And I obviously don't know as much about the UK context. I have some information, partially because of colleagues from amazing organizations like Release, as well as others like Transform and The Loop that I really like and respect, that have put out information. But I'll focus just very briefly, not so specifically on the United States, but a little bit more of the global context. The US has the distinct honor of being one of the reasons that we're dealing with criminalization in the first place, at least in the modern kind of contemporary era. Some people know this already, but large industrial interests, mostly from Western Europe, were making money and were quite happy economically and commercially to be trading in drugs up until really the mid-late 1800s. And there's a lot of history and complexity there that I won't go into today, but it's worth looking up. And I think Darren and maybe others have even better context on that than I do. But what I'll say is that the shift of drugs as yet another kind of consumerist economic kind of market product, and to like a criminalized paradigm that then obviously continued the existence of these products but just drove them into the underground, was really something that happened at the end of the 19th century or early 20th, primarily encouraged and pushed by the United States, which at the time was not, I don't want to say wasn't involved in the drug trade, because we were with respect to a number of substances, including alcohol and others, but were not involved in the same way that you have kind of large industrial economic interests from Western Europe at that time. That really solidified after World War II, when the UN was formed and kind of the US had disproportionate influence in what would become the global drug control scheme. And that's the one where we have criminalization for personal, community, individual use outside of these prescribed settings. And over the last 60, 70, 80 years or so, we've really kind of dialed in and refined this kind of medicalized framework in which controlled substances are permitted to be used through certain channels and not through others. There's a lot of nuance there. On one hand, it's kind of nice to have agencies that are looking at quality control. We do, I think, want people to be tracking what claims are being made and make sure that consumers or people who are buying a product or receiving something are getting what they actually are asking for. I think that's we see the echoes of that and the impacts of that in the underground and the current drug poisoning and overdose crisis, where what happens when we don't know. So there's some value potentially, to bringing things into light and having a regulated system and bringing that, but then it comes with the cost of the market, promotion and kind of what you were saying earlier, Farzana, which what it means to bring these powerful modalities into kind of contemporary capitalism and the way that the market and the economy currently works. Of course, there's some elements of that in the underground as it is, but it's a different ballgame when you're out in public. So maybe the only other thing I'll add besides those pieces, because I think the last couple of speakers really covered this beautifully, is going a little bit further back. I like to think about the beginning of the global drug control scheme, you could say, as I think of it, as starting about 500 years ago. Maybe there's more history. I've seen Darren speak a bit about even further back. But I say that to say that the so-called New World was really like one of the first testing grounds for the current framework of prohibition and criminalization. The early settlers knew and could figure out quite quickly. There's writings from the church and other entities early on in the early 1500s of the importance of some of these plants and these practices to the cultures that they found, that they encountered. So there was absolutely an intentional kind of restriction, limiting cultural genocide of those practices, or attempted cultural genocide of those practices early on, not just because there was this kind of idea that they're demonic and outside of the range of what the people who were observing understood to be real, through their own religious spiritual paradigm, economic industrial or pre-industrial paradigm, but also because of a distinct awareness that those practices were absolutely used to maintain kind of cultural cohesion, rites of passage, initiatory frameworks, what aspects of society that really kept things going. Today, you can kind of see, maybe we'll talk about this in the second hour. Today, you can kind of see the whispers of that coming back through. And maybe that's, inshallah, something that can be brought back into modernity in a way that's healthy and dynamic and safe. But I do really see the beginning of this story of repression, at least starting there, because I think that that awareness set groundwork for the then later arguments for these being either demonic practices or these being kind of sinful practices or these being practices that had to be pulled out of society to ensure that, you know, the kind of like white institution on a hill could be created, like in the wake. So it is helpful, I think, to zoom out and look both at, you know, what you were sharing, Camille, and what I think people are seeing, which is like the acute impacts of today's drug policy, which we see as kind of what a lot of y'all were saying around, you know, discriminatory policing and of course incarceration and the various aspects of stigma that are more subtle but affect all of our lives, whether or not we're engaged with the prison system or the criminal justice system. And I think a lot about, you know, what it means to have had those practices suppressed so early on, and how I wonder if we are lucky or if we're cursed that it was tobacco and sugar and alcohol that became consumer products 500 years ago and not peyote and mushrooms and other things. We're in a different paradigm now where we could be seeing the beginning of that commercialization, but I'm grateful that the plants resist it. And there's more to say about that, but I'll pause now. I just want to give that kind of 500-year context to like what it is that led to where we landed at today.
Thank you so much. And I'm just uplifting. Camille put a point that the British did the same with colonized countries in Africa. And I think, Darren, you will probably speak to some of this. For example, ordinances against witchcraft and juju, which were also banned plant medicine usage. And yeah, I think, Darren, I'm going to invite you on, and there's already been a nod that maybe you can take us to beyond this time frame, but also other contexts beyond the global north framework.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate everyone's input as well. There's not much more I can say, but just echo. But I speak just from a perspective of being somebody who's from, you know, these so-called disproportionate communities who have been highly affected and impacted by the so-called war on drugs. I think it's really important as an advocate for this space, like that education is the key. There's so much happening in this space, but I do feel that the people over the years of, you know, the war on drugs and the impact of these substances have primarily affected people that look like me, coming from communities where I come from. We are the least educated about what's currently happening, you know, the past as well as the present and the future of this. So for me, I speak to those and speak to people who are working with those communities that we have to make sure that this information is then made translatable, transferable to so-called hard-to-reach communities, which are actually not hard-to-reach communities. If you know how to do the outreach, you can reach them. But at the same time, I'll say that to say that it's really important that these communities are to consider creating their own table, so to speak. It's not necessarily about, you know, waiting for somebody based on history, which is suggested that don't have your best intentions at heart. So it's really important that those that are coming from our communities like are able to take this type of information, make it transferable to those who don't speak this language. I say that to say that when most folks, you know, coming from where I come from are getting into this stuff, it's categorized as a drug. It's put in the same place and space as all the drugs out there, the hard drugs to the soft drugs. And, you know, just as far as understanding what psychedelics are, what entheogens are, like what the words mean, you know, what does it mean to be, you know, engaged in, you know, into these technologies, knowing that you may be entering this space, utilizing it as a medicine, because that's the narrative, the current narrative. But as you said, if we're moving beyond that, prior to it being utilized as a medicine, these have multiple functions. And primarily when you speak to these communities that were the the gatekeepers who were gifted these technologies, they primarily say it was to communicate with their ancestors, their spirits, their gods, for lack of better titles. These were the foundations of you learning and building a relationship with these plants and fungi organisms. So there's many people that are stepping into this space where, uneducated at the end of the day, or naively, even if it's from the medicine perspective, and then they slowly but surely cross over into a more spiritual space and don't have the legs, don't have the foundations to understand how to navigate these spaces. And then whether it's the drug policy, whether it's the academic space, this is like a conversation that is not happening too much. And for me, it should be the primary conversation, because that's what the people who are gifted this type of technology from millenniums ago, in some cases, have to say about it. And I think that they're best placed, best qualified as educators to educate us, so that we can educate, people of color in particular that are wanting to reconnect with these technologies. So that's just what I thought I could bring to the space.
Thank you so much, Darren, and also for that really important anchoring of education, but also education in which context and for who. So just really, I think it's a mic drop moment. Everyone is, I hope you're seeing that in the chat, like that grounding is really important, and also how people can skillfully navigate these spaces. So really appreciating that. I'd like to invite all our kind of speakers to be on screen, because we can go into a more conversational element. And it's lovely to see you all together, and also that I can see who wants to kind of pick up a question. So yeah, lovely to see you. I know we instructed folks off screen, but yeah, Darren and Ismail, if you want to come on, and that's on screen, we'd love to see you. And I'm gonna kind of open up our Q&A space with like an initial question about what each of you, or as many of you that want to respond to this, see the potential of psychedelics and plant medicine and in healing and justice work. And I know that that's like, you've already all touched on the multiple different dimensions of it, but just as an anchor, and then if you feel called to and you want to explore a different dimension, absolutely go there. But if anyone wants to maybe kick us off in that direction, and then yeah, go where you need to. I love that Camille, you once said the plants have a plan, and I really believe that the plants have a plan. So honor the plan. And anyone want to start us off on what the potentials you see in the medicine? Ismail, you're nodding. Do you want to start?
Sure. You're like, would you like to start? And I'm like, wow, why do I start? Yeah, so maybe I'll say a couple of things that will kind of continue from the conversation we're having in the first part of this, which I appreciated focus of a couple folks. I think Akua and Darren and others have said a bit about kind of some of that, the potential that they saw, that we saw, that I saw certainly too as a younger person, of how it could support my friends and I. And I had the experience of seeing both the amazing possibility of what psychedelics could offer and also the shadowiest shadow side possible at the same time. Like, I think that I, as a younger person, came into contact with a lot of dependency and habitual use and overuse and use in contexts that were not appropriate or safe. And also both like the personal and the systemic impacts of that, the substance dependencies, the reliance on chemicals and other things to cope. And of course, the systemic impacts of policing and so on, that combined, lead to extreme mental distress to the, even to people ending their own lives and otherwise. So I start there, even though it's a bit heavy, because I do think that we're in an era of a bit of a hype machine. And I want to start with the power of the substances as opposed to just like the healing potential. I think Darren's point is really important from earlier, that in many traditional communities, the utilization of these substances is not quite only for healing. And it is important, and I understand why healing and healthcare are kind of primary angles at this time, both for like political strategic reasons, which we can get into, but also because of the time that we're in and the need that people have. One of the things I've been talking about for the last couple of years is the tension between the urgency of need and the quality of care, and like the constant onslaught that probably a lot of us are holding, of like the need within our communities to have support. I don't fault people for using substances to cope. I think that it's easy to see why it's so easy to be in that kind of groove, and how that, when unsupported, can lead to so many kind of deleterious effects on the individual and society. Often starting upstream, the systemic level, at the trauma, at the intergenerational level. But with all of that context said, I do feel like what we're moving toward is an era where the use of these powerful substances is not only in these uncontrolled settings, which may have been really healing for folks like Camille and Akua and myself, certainly, and maybe you and Darren and others, but also the awareness that when we add a little bit more context, a little bit more structure, a little bit more support to these experiences, ironically, kind of sometimes changes them away from being so fun. I think that if you're going into this thinking that it's just fun, then you might be mistaken. And one of the most persuasive things I've found working with politically conservative or audiences that are more skeptical of this is there's this kind of assumption that psychedelic therapy or psychedelic healing work is really fun. And it's not. I can just tell everybody right now, there may be aspects of joy and bliss for sure, and incredible lightening of loads, intergenerational and structural and so on, for sure, that some people do experience when they're well supported. And healing is hard. Maybe that's not the best meme to put out into society, but I do people want to know that when you're starting on a journey, I like to think of psychedelics as kind of clearing the brush for the trailheads. They don't actually take you to the top of the mountain. They make you think you're there for a bit of time, but they really just clear the brush for the trailheads, and then you will have to hike up yourself over time. And the reason I love that is because it actually allows us to maintain agency in our healing process, which can be hard. Sometimes it's easier when you're being like flicked off the edge of the cliff and you just got no choice, but you got to surrender, But it's actually not quite so simple. And even if you get that briefly, what it actually I think offers for a lot of people is the choice, the agency to make a decision about what path they take. It's very easy. Let me put this another way. It can be really challenging to see what choices are available, and sometimes there just aren't because of your positionality, your context. But it is true that there are a lot of people for whom there are choices, but they can't see them because of their own conditioning or their own kind of understanding of reality. I think of it sometimes as a imagination game. Like, who has the bigger imagination, the prohibitionists or those of us that are trying to change the world? I don't know, but well, I do know. I think I know. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, to me, this healing potential really has to do with like unlocking that imagination, unlocking possibility, because at the end of the day, it's people who have to use their bodies, their human pet selves, to do things. And we are finite and limited creatures. We don't have unlimited energy. We don't have unlimited time. So when I think about like, what is the potential for psychedelics to heal? Yes, there's like, of course, all of the exciting things about that we're seeing in the research and the clinical trials. There's a lot of amazing work that's getting done there that MAPS, or my organization, and other people are doing that is really exciting to see, especially brought into that kind of medicalized healthcare paradigm. So I think, Camille, you said this at the beginning, I think it's really important to have that channel because there are people for whom like that's the paradigm they're living, and we're not going to change them in their lifetime. They have hundreds of years of conditioning to undo. Like, don't put that on yourselves. Let's not put that burden on ourselves. We can make those environments safe so the people that are there, and also start to make these like kind of think of it as erosion of this like calcification that we've been building over time that kind of freezes all of our collective social joints. So giving a little bit of that like kind of wiggle room, and then also giving the opportunity to see that there's actually multiple paths here. And then people still have to deal with the confronting question, like, well, what path do I want to take now that I have options, now that I can't pretend that I only have one choice or that I'm only stuck here. And that's one of the hard things about going through the process, which is like the integration, there's a lot to be deconstructed with there and that idea too, but the integration, which is the realization that you have choice, like that's a pretty psychedelic thing, whether or not you're doing substances. Just think that expansion of awareness can be really confronting for people. So holding that feels really important, but it makes the potential very great. So I'll pause there for now.
Thank you so much. And, particularly that, this very neoliberal and kind of white understanding of what healing is. And I think that actually, like, I think Darren once I had heard you say, talk about the kind of the medicine is just the truth, like it's just taking you towards that, and that this point of these ideas of healing being like love and light, and I think that those ideas are really like we've all internalized them, but actually this is not the work that we're attending to. We're really attending to these expansions, these paradigm shifts and possibilities, and there are real aspects of it that touch on our aliveness and the spectrum of human experiences within that includes those hard edges, that includes the types of deaths that we incur in those spaces, and also what happens when we don't have the embodied container or the skills to enact on what we discover in those spaces or integrate what we've discovered in those spaces. And those are real things that we have to be working towards and building. And the education point that is reoccurring that Darren touched on. Darren, you've come on, and so do you want to pick up?
Sure. Well, I'll speak on, like, I'll give a personal testimony just to speak to that, because where we're currently at, there's many folks that, as I said, step into this space, and the current narrative is medicine, healing and medicine. It's trauma-based, which I totally understand and can relate to, being somebody of African heritage by way of the Caribbean. I didn't end up there by choice. So without going into those details, what I'm aware is that there is a narrative where, you know, kind of like it's a one-size-fits-all model approach to it from the clinical standpoint. And like I always say, it's like from a gardener's perspective, like nobody wants their garden to be like next door's garden. You want your uniqueness. Everybody is unique. So when it comes to the work with the technology, it's the same way. Like each individual is unique. You need to find out that this is, like my older teacher would say, it's the journey of the alone into the alone. Like you really need to understand that you're going within yourself. Culturally, your ancestors are inside of you. And these are some of the things that, are like seem very far-fetched, are far removed from our day-to-day narrative. When you mention things like communicating or connecting with your ancestors, you're told that that's, black magic, voodoo, stay away from that, let the dead rest in peace. And we come to find out that that's the foundations of what's kept many of these cultures who deal with these technologies in place. And because that's their ancestors are their foundations. So it's like, the basis of like, how do we actually go about bringing this narrative or bringing this narrative to the forefront of the conversation, making it part of the daily conversation where it's not so much of a taboo, just bringing up psychedelics is a taboo, bringing up your ancestors is a taboo. It's like, there's so many taboos. But with that said, we need to, people of color, coming from wherever you come from, need to kind of see where you come from and make the appropriate narrative, your own narrative, not expecting change from anybody, but really understanding that we are actually all here now, right now, children, as we said, this is nursery, we're at the infancy stage of this thing, but we are co-creating it. We have the opportunity to co-create and direct this in the place and space that we do. So it's now time for the lion. I say all that to say it's now time for the lion to stand up and tell its own story, its own narrative, because we understand that this one-size-fits-all model just doesn't fit everybody. So everybody needs to look within themselves, look within their culture, look within their heritage, and see what we can co-create that is more tangible and bespoke to us, not what our neighbours' garden looks like. Like, what does your garden look like? What requirements do you need? And I think once we start having those conversations and putting them at the forefront, we're gonna be all right. I have faith in the technology.
Yeah, love that. All the snaps. I think everyone's affirming that and uplifting that point, and also seeing how the health and the healing. We were to mention this before we even got on the call. It has to be often the Trojan horse because of the context that we're living in and working in, and so yeah, thank you for expanding us into all the gardens that we get to grow. Akua, do you want to pick up?
Yes, that was really great, and I've been thinking a lot about the history of medicines and spiritual plants and what happens when they enter the West. And so with that in mind, thinking about what happened with coffee, with tea, with tobacco, with what we call chocolate now, there's a way in which we can see probably this is also going to be what happens with these medicines, that they start off as a medicine, and then some kind of something is created, and then there is a change, and then we get a very either watered down or a poisoned version, as in the case of cocaine and in the case of heroin. And so now you've got your opiate medicines and you have heroin, and most people have no idea that they come from the same place. So with that in mind, I really think about creating culture around these medicines, in terms of, for me and my family and our children, the younger nieces and nephews who are coming up. And I'm starting to have conversations with really quite young children and saying to them, this is what we do. You know, when auntie is coughing a lot, it's like she's going to have this medicine and it helps her lungs. And this is a medicine that you will have when you come of age, and this is what we do, and this is what your cousin had when he was getting into trouble, and now he's not getting into trouble. This is what I take when I feel sad. This is what is helping me to be able to deal with normal life. And since I've been having those conversations, especially with the younger members of the family, it just feels really, really right. Because I think our society will do what it's always done in terms of those who are in charge of things. And so for us in this space, we have to definitely think about the future and think about our communities and think, you know, deepen these technologies really, really into our lives. So this is the thing I've become really passionate about at the moment, is how to really internalize this medicine and externalize it and think about longevity.
Thank you so much, Camille.
Yes, so much richness in what you're all sharing. Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, Akua, about culture and growing and building culture, I feel like that's such an important aspect to social change work. There's obviously a lot of focus on legislation, changing laws, making policy, which is really important. There's this other piece of actually, I guess for lack of a better term, like changing hearts and minds and creating different rituals and different relational dynamics that we actually experience day to day. And to me, like that's the culture change piece. And, you know, we're in an exciting and challenging time, I suppose, of reckoning with a lot of the impacts of colonization. And there's a lot of kind of dissecting that, but I hope there'll be more and more working to kind of repattern the legacies of that. This is a term that comes from NChem and Defo, or I heard it from NChem first. Instead of the word healing, it's kind of repatterning, maybe speaks more to kind of incrementally shape-shifting away from, it's not necessarily neat and tidy, it can be quite messy, but like intentionally shifting away, moving in a different direction. And I think we need to repattern the impacts of colonization, not just talking about it, not just thinking about it in institutions, but also on this level of culture. And a big part of that to me is about how we reconnect with plants, plant teachers, or plant technologies, as Darren calls them, but different kind of vehicles for ancestral communication and ancestral wisdom, so that we can hopefully build more of the infrastructure that will allow for livable futures. And I know that's so much of what you all at Healing Justice London are doing in the kind of rehearsing freedoms work of like, how can you make that incremental movement towards doing things differently and being in the experiment of it. I think we're going to have to do a lot of that because we've been steeped in so much of this domination, extraction culture. But I do think that plant medicines have an incredible power in allowing us to come into alignment and access the ancestral wisdom and remember the fragments and the pieces that were there before that still live on in us, to allow those things to come through, that if we use our agency, we can actually start to create those experiments and live them, and hopefully create the kind of ecosystems that will allow us to move beyond the current paradigm. And I think there are other things that can do this too. I think somatic practices and ritual are also incredible components that I really combine with plant medicine work. But I do think we need these, or it's helpful to have these components for social change. So we're not just going into the mind, but we're actually moving and maybe time traveling, as you'd say, Farzana, and accessing this information and allowing it to shape how we move and how we grow culture.
Thank you so much. You all touched on so many things, and I might just bring holding the vastness of these technologies and maybe bring like a concrete personal shift for me that happened through the medicine that I think is not necessarily you have to do the medicine for, but invites us to these new choices. And as I mentioned, my intimate network, there are lots of folks who navigate mental distress or altered consciousness, and for multiple different reasons. And I think a younger version of me would often, what would kick in would be like, I need to control this, make it safe, fix it. And I think I didn't realize how much of that was those internalizations of not knowing what to do with the realm of emotional expression, because it's, whiteness and white supremacy culture, dismembers us from our capacity to emote, or criminalizes our emotions or the ways that we express and be and know. And I think one of the profound shifts that happened to me, I remember being able to see the parallels in, family members who expressed and emoted certain things whilst in distress, and also folks who were in ceremony. And that was a huge shift for me of like, that we pathologize these moments, and actually when we are thinking about abolition and liberation, holding the limits, the responsibilities and the powers, what does it mean for us to open up? What the medicine can also open up is those realms of expression, knowing, feeling, accessing, integrate that, anchor that, and so that we can also see the multiple ways in which people will live in their gardens. And it's not all going to look the same, that we're going to have these pluriversal, multiversal ways in which people will inhabit their gardens, and our imaginations can't yet hold that. And because we go to this space of like norming whiteness, norming particular ways of living and being, that was a huge collapse, both in an act of witnessing, but also internally. And I think that is something that's still working through me, and noticing where I'm still going into that. Like, if I don't understand something, how do I respond to it? If something is an unknown, do I go to control it and fix it? Or do I go to like, let it be and let it have its space and work with it and dance with it and explore it? So those are some of the bigger invitations that also tie to abolition, which wants us to present each other with new choices, not just punishment, not just control, not just policing. So just doing a little bit of that connective work. I now want to, we've got lots of different questions, but one that's kind of come up a few times is really about, I'm going to tie these three together, which is around like cultural appropriation of plants, and how do people, work with plants in a way that's ethical and responsible and honoring and appropriate. And also then connecting to Izzy, you'd already touched on the kind of markets and the new emerging markets and all of these types of things. So maybe if a few folks wanted to speak to what would it mean to responsibly work to the plant with plants and psychedelics, on the different tiers that those responsibilities can occur. Who wants to kick us off? Camille, you look like you're leaning in. Go.
Sure. I think this is a big one that we're reckoning with, because, let's be real, ayahuasca tourism is a big thing, and it's having a huge impact on many communities. Maybe in some would say a positive material way, but also many negative ways, in like entangled ways. And I feel that there can be a neo-colonial dynamic maybe that's at play in a lot of this, of wanting to go to these places that aren't your home and extract and take, and not really care about the communities who hold these medicine lineages, and under threat from various companies and the whole situation that's happening. So I think this is a big question. I think Darren also speaks to the fact that mushrooms grow in so many places around the world that I think it's a pretty great access point to actually work with mushrooms, because they can be cultivated so easily in different places, and there's been so many different traditional approaches to mushroom use around the world. But then you also have interesting models, I'm going to put this in the chat, that are working within the country specific context to actually have models that work for the communities who have a lineage and a relationship to certain plant medicine. So for example, the shrub iboga, which is used within the Bwiti tradition by various communities who practice Bwiti, and some of the peoples who practice Bwiti live in Gabon. It's still used for initiation and for various rites, but the kind of chemical compound that's often extracted from iboga, ibogaine, has become a very, very powerful medicine to heal or to treat opioid dependency. So in the West, there's lots and lots of people excited about this because it can be so supportive in helping people with opioid dependency. But what's been happening is a lot of people have been poaching iboga from Gabon. And so there are now policies in place that are actually limiting how much people can harvest. And there's organizations like Blessing of the Forest that are being set up to actually ensure that iboga cultivation is happening in a way that's sustainable and that allows for the use of people who practice Bwiti, so those who still have an intact cultural connection to the medicine. And so there can be parameters and boundaries about how much people outside of Gabon can actually access that. And so that there's some kind of reciprocity and control based on the needs of the people who still have a kind of lineage model with the medicine. So I think that's one example of how people are navigating it, but this is also coming up with peyote. And in the context, maybe Izzy could speak more to this. There's been these movements called decriminalized nature, where people in different parts of the United States are trying to have access to decriminalize the use of certain plant medicines. But within these policy reforms, there's been a lot of contention around peyote because it's another plant medicine that is endangered, that's being over-harvested, again, by a lot of European descendant people, to the point that the communities that still have a traditional lineage relationship to it are not necessarily being able to access it in the ways that they need to. Because let's remember, it's not just about pleasure necessarily, or it's really about cosmology. If you have certain relationships to plants, it is what is helping you connect to your ancestors and the shared kind of worldview and system that you live within. So I think it's important to make sure that those who are the medicine keepers and in lineages of these medicines have priority to them while we work out what this regulated space is going to look like, and that we center their needs, because within the medicalized model, there's more and more Western doctors and scientists and people talking about this, but less indigenous peoples and those who have been the medicine keepers of these traditions actually saying this is what we need and this is how it's going to go. So I think we need to be mindful of that. I'll pass it on from there.
It's such an interesting one because being in a capitalist majority world, different things are happening. So at the moment in my home country of Ghana, my son was actually able to drink ayahuasca grown in Ghana. And there are a few farmers now who are actually growing both plants. And it was interesting because actually it was brewed by a British psychotherapist in Ghana who has attended ceremonies in South America. And yeah, she had a go, and there was this very big, long conversation kind of, and I was like, no, I am so happy for him to try it. I trust you. I think you're not a stupid woman. I'm pretty sure you brewed it well. And if it worked, and if it doesn't work, nobody trips. But it did work, and they all tripped, including the taxi driver who drove them to the farm. Once he heard that they were going to be partaking in this medicine, he was like, well, actually, I have issues. I want to try it. And apparently all the way back to Accra, he was like, I am going to tell everybody there is this revolutionary. So it's kind of interesting. And there are loads of farms now in Ghana growing iboga, and they're handling a lot of exporting. So I think there are some plants where it's going to be easier for them to be grown in other places as well. And then things like peyote, from what I understand, that's not as easy. But I don't know if there are other deserts in the world where they can be grown as well. So I'm finding this space we're in now really interesting, because what happens, you know, when the taxi driver goes back to Accra and is talking, you know, these medicines are finding amazing ways to spread around the world. And so it makes me really, really excited that actually things are going to spread faster than the tentacles of capitalism, I think, can keep up with. And so that makes me really, really excited. And then also it makes me very relaxed about protecting those plants that aren't so easy to cultivate, because, you know, mushrooms are everywhere. So for me, I still haven't touched ayahuasca just because mushrooms are everywhere, and I did feel uncomfortable about drinking ayahuasca, and then also not knowing who brewed it, how long has somebody had it in a plastic, you know, container sitting in their garage for Lord knows how long. So yeah, these are interesting times, very, very, very interesting times. But I think we do still have to remember where so much of this knowledge has come from, so as not to repeat the same harms that happened in the past, really.
Thanks so much. Darren, you've come on. Do you want to, I feel like that's your signal to speak. Do you want to go, and then Izzy, we can have you after Darren?
No, thank you for understanding the coding. Yeah, I was just in transit, so I'm just getting stationary again. Again, I appreciate all of it, you know, all the input. It's just very much relative in this day and age. And I'll just add my couple of pence, and that's basically getting where you fit in. And I say that to say that I was conceived, born and bred in the UK. For those of us that think that we need to travel anywhere or go anywhere physically beyond this landmass that we call the United Kingdom, although I'm not there right now, just giving an example of where I'm coming from, simply because everything we need is on our doorstep. This is a big part of the foundation that I'm talking about people having when they start this journey. So being from the UK, if you was to go to the west coast of our landmass, like to Cornwall, Wales, Ireland, and further north, Scotland, and cross over into Ireland, there is a wealth and abundance of information over there that looks at the natural plants, fauna, fungi of the United Kingdom, which would give you some enlightenment, give me enlightenment, which it has, because I was conceived here. I'm interested in this stuff. So I'm finding out, you know, what's going on in here in the UK, what traditions, what culture is there. And I hear it a lot of time back home when people say, oh, the reason why I'm going to Peru is because we don't have that here. We don't have the culture. We don't have the plants. Well, we do. It's just that we're not taking a conscious effort to go out and find what these plants are. Who holds the knowledge? Who holds the customs of this stuff? I know they're out there because I go out there and I meet them. They're out there. They exist. They really do. So it's for people to stop, you know, looking on the other side of the garden, thinking, you know, the grass is green on the other side, and appreciate what's going on your side in your garden and nurture and develop that. I think that's really important in a sustainable, you know, in a sustainable approach to addressing, you know, this psychedelic tourism.
Yeah. Nuance is such music to my ears. It's so good to hear this conversation because it has so much more depth than can be communicated on like memes and on the internet, even though I do love memes. There's a lot that can't be communicated in a single slide. So I just am very grateful for the kind of depth of the responses so far. This is a very complicated question. And I really align and feel really solid about what the three of you shared, because I do think that all of those answers are true. You know, it's like there's slight adjustments in how we might personally approach these questions, but all of those things are true. Not in like a everything is true kind of way, but in like a there's actually like depth and reality to all of these pieces. All of that too. I think just y'all said a lot of amazing things. I think I'll just add maybe 2 or 3 pieces. One, this jumps actually off of something that Darren was saying earlier a couple of questions ago, around the choice. And in their most simple form, I like to think of psychedelics as tools for meaning making. It kind of goes a little bit to what you were saying, Darren, around like how we tell the story and like the story of ourselves, and how we're telling our own story and getting agency over our own story instead of living other people's. So on that note around meaning making, that makes me think about, well, what are the current paradigms that we use or have access to make meaning out of our lives? And I think especially in the West or the global North, where a lot of culture has been replaced by kind of consumerist post-industrial capitalism, we have kind of a lack of things that help us actually find meaning. And we're expected to find meaning through the consumption of things, through the purchase of products, and through the endless doom scroll of the internet, so, and obviously those things are paltry. They don't actually give us what we need. They might give us the dopamine hit temporarily, but they don't actually allow us to situate ourselves in consciousness and in society and in the world. And I think, and actually crucially in cosmology, which Camille is what you said. And I think there's something about this balance about meaning and cosmology, which to me is the starting point is, why is the West lacking so much of that? And it's not just the West, right? This has expanded across the world. This is part of what's happened with just the globalization, industrialization, and so on. But I say that to say that like we're starting with this major vacuum of meaning and understanding and contextualization for ourselves, not just our identities. There's like a whole political element, which is kind of Farzana, where you started this conversation, but also like even in a more cosmic sense, in a more kind of like ancestral sense, like where do we land on the point? And, different people have different stories and different histories. But so when I think about that vacuum, I'm thinking, well, that to me sort of explains, I'm not saying it justifies, but it sort of explains the volume of appropriation that I feel like I see from people. And I don't actually think it's just European descendant people that do this. I think a lot of people who've had their cultures taken from them in Western Europe and in the United States and North America also experience this, even if they're people of color, people of African descent, and so on. Like this is not it's definitely because of the historical context affected by whiteness and European colonialization and so on, no doubt. But to only focus on that aspect, I think misses the point that there's actually this like total like whitewashing or kind of like culture washing that's happening, that's like aligning us with like consumerist values that also kind of ties into white supremacy and all these things, but it's like a Venn diagram, they overlap, but it's not exactly the same thing. So I start there to say that when thinking about the appropriate way to do things, and there's a lot of different theories and approaches to this, some of which have been shared here, and I agree with a lot of what's been said. I start by thinking about that void. And then there's like, okay, what can we do to start shifting that void, which may have to do with psychedelics, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's larger cultural, social things that need to be addressed for that to be there. How to do that in context so we don't end up in like a hyper individualistic identity world where we're suddenly adding extra boundaries to ourselves because of our identities and our history. There's an edge there. And then as far as like how it works, I think about the history, to your point, Akua, I think that was a great note that you said about like why you choose one medicine or the others. And it's interesting to see. And I noticed in the question, I was reading the questions before you asked them, Farzana, and I noticed that it's an interesting paradox when you hear, and this is true, not every single one, but a lot of people and leaders from various tribes in the Amazon, it really depends on who you ask and other things. But this theme that like more people can drink and should drink ayahuasca, and ayahuasca left the jungle on purpose, like that is a very consistent theme. A lot of people say that. I'm not saying that means that we should be like kind of putting it through medicalized processes and selling patented pills by any means, but I am saying that there is an idea that the medicine has its own agency, that has its own kind of relationship to the world and people. I'll let you direct us, Farzana, but if you want us to get more or less woo in the last part of this conversation, but what I'll say is, just to add on to it, is like, okay, great. So what I'll say is like, I don't think it's that out of this world to believe that there's like some level of awareness that these plants and the relationship between the plants and the earth has. Is it true that like human exploitation means that we do things whether or not the plants like it? For sure. Like there's no question that there's a human anthropocentric element that affects that. And also I do think that there's, the way that I've heard it said is like ayahuasca might be for everyone, but serving ayahuasca isn't. It's not quite the case that just because you can participate in something that does actually have this kind of ecological cultural element doesn't mean that you get to take it or own it. And I do feel like that there is some intentionality. One beautiful thing, I think ayahuasca is a really good example, is that it's traveled with the ceremony. It's really, no matter where you go in the world, there are very few places where people are just drinking ayahuasca for fun. They're mostly doing it in ceremonies, and the ceremonies aren't all integrity. They're not all in the right tradition. Sure, there's a huge variation there. We're relearning culture kind of all over again in modernity, but there is an attempt. And that's huge. When I was 19 years old, people were not talking about ceremonial use. And I talked to a lot of people about drugs, online forums, places, whatever. Like, not that it wasn't happening, but it was not something that was getting to teenagers at that time. There may have been people who were in the field and practitioners and so on, of course. Teenagers now, like young people now, know that there's a theme here that's not just about hedonism and so on. To me, so bringing in that ceremonial element allows us to have that more nuanced conversation. And I think that brings in safety and harm reduction. I haven't talked about that too much, but that brings in actually safer container. Ceremony itself is a form of harm reduction. These spaces themselves build in all these harm reduction techniques that we're like trying to relearn as things go crazy out in public. But the last note I wanted to make was just jumping on what you were saying, Camille, and as a mestizo person myself, mixed European, Indigenous, and African descent on my mother's side, I have seen how, especially in South America, I know more about that than other regions, like this kind of mestizo mixed approach is both like super baked into society just by the nature of the last, 2, 3, 500 years of mixing both consensual and not. And I think that has led to this like legitimacy of these kind of hybrid approaches and these syncretic approaches. And I don't always know what the line is. I'm always looking for it myself or trying to figure it out or trying to navigate. But to me, what it really boils down to is like reverence and integrity and social context. I think people should learn more before they do things, read more, research more, experience more. I think that because of the kind of colonial capitalist environment that we're kind of engaging with at all times, we have this pressure to be experts and to be visible and to be centered, as especially younger generations. I see this in myself internally. I see this in my generation. And I feel like the kind of rush to be experts, the rush to teach people things, to be in a position of expertise in teaching, it's because people see the hype of how cool it is to be a leader, but they don't see the responsibility that comes with that. And they frankly don't want it a lot of the time when they get it. And that's really confronting, because what we have now is a bunch of people who want to claim this position of leadership, but aren't willing to take the responsibility of being in that position. And that is the problem. Appropriation to me is sort of window dressing. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm saying that it's kind of a surface level issue compared to the deeper thing that's happening. That's not just the pulling of patterns. Of course, there's like the resale, there's absolute real economic considerations there. But I do think that what's happening and the risk there, besides the continued erasure, besides the continued attempt of genocide of these cultural practices, which is very real, which others have already talked about, is what happens next, which is when there's erasure, when the lack of context, lack of context exists, suddenly we're actually making it more dangerous, not safer. And even the people with their best intentions and what they think is their role and the calling that they got from the medicine or whatever, like suddenly they're in a position where they don't actually have the context. They didn't spend the time to get trained. And I'm not talking months here, y'all. I'm talking years. I'm talking many years, which is appropriate and in alignment with many of the actual practices, not just indigenous practices, but also the Western medical transpersonal environment requires multiple years of training, even if you're not using medicine. These are very powerful things. So to me, it's like if you're bringing in the time, the consistency, the reliability. I've now been in this field long enough to see people who, when I met them 10 years ago, I was like, I don't know if they're really acting in integrity here. This feels like they're part of the hype machine. And some people over the years have dropped off to move on to AI and NFTs and whatever the hell. But there are people who 10 years later are still there. And even if I'm like, I'm not sure if you really get it, sometimes these people, and you're like, I'm not sure if you really get it. What I do see is consistency and a willingness to stay disciplined and on a path. And to me, that is way more valuable than like whether or not you like are wearing the right thing.
Thank you so much. And we would love to take more questions, but we've got about 8 minutes. And I actually just want to maybe offer each of you a few minutes to offer some kind of closing remarks or anything that you didn't get to say. There has been a lot of questions around like, what should people do if they are wanting to like learn more or have an interest in the journey. So if anyone wants to pick that up in your kind of closing remarks, that would be amazing. And Darren, lots of folks are like worried you're not on the screen. So we've got loads of messages saying, is Darren okay? So maybe you could come back on screen and let folks know that you're actually still here and okay, and kick us off.
Yes, I'm definitely alive and okay. As I mentioned, I'm just going through a transition here, and I didn't think it was worth it, and all the background noises and the visuals. So with that said, no, I think I would just close with, the sharing. I think as far as people getting into how they can get into this, there's books, there's courses, there's an abundance of stuff out there now at the moment. There's training available, but I really think it just starts at home. I just say that to say, like, speak with your parents. Even if you are an adult, you can speak with your parents about this. Like, to start to, as I said, to normalize this discussion. Find out if they've partook. Are there any rituals, customs, ceremonies, so to speak, that they may have engaged in their past or even in their present that you can involve, engage, integrate into your practice. Like we've learned, or I'm learning, is a very bespoke practice. We have the ceremonies and rituals there as a reference for us all, but it is a relationship that you're going to build yourself. And I think starting with your roots, your foundations, your family ties, that's really important. Go speak to their elders in their family. These are some of the places and spaces I would encourage people to go. And then you go to the books, and then you go to the courses, and then you go to the seminars and stuff like that, and integrate all of that information with your roots and your foundations.
Akua, you want to go next?
Yeah, and as Darren mentioned before, going to the Googles. For me, YouTube in the early days was just so brilliant. It's from YouTube that I learned which books to buy, and podcasts. And there is so much information that actually you learn to be discerning over time, because you start to see, well, yeah, I want to listen more to this person, or I don't think I want to watch somebody's trip report where it begins with, I took Iboga on my friend's settee. You work all of those things out slowly as you research more and more and more. And then the thing that I say to people just going in is really honing in on what it is you want to let go of, what it is you don't want anymore. I think it's such a good place to start, even internally, as you're working towards maybe one day finding the medicines, is just really honing in on those kind of things. And then, yeah, research. There are so many scientists and healers and people speaking online about all of these technologies and medicines now. So yeah, just be discerning, search, and it will start to find you. I mean, that's the magic of all of this. You will, yeah, they will start to find you and you will find them. And just to piggyback off what Ismail was saying about the medicines also having their agency, I just think that we're at such a lucky time at the moment where we're really in the flow of also the medicines agency. And, that may change over time as they become watered down. But I think if people stay with the full experience, the whole technology, then you'll still be at the heart of all of it. And at the heart of most of it is also building community with yourself, building community with your family, building community with that wider network. And so it's an interesting journey we're on, and I'm really, really excited to be here at this time.
Izzy or Camille, who wants to go?
I can go just because I want Camille to have the last word. Maybe just a couple of final thoughts. I just really appreciate this conversation because one of the themes we tracked today was how there is this conversation. It's even the title, right? Healing justice, which I love as a concept because it maintains the aspect of healing, but it also brings it outside of the individual into kind of like an interpersonal and structural aspect. And maybe I guess the one, I thought I was going to say something else, but like this thing keeps coming to me. I think that I really wanted to emphasize the value of patience. And Akua, I kind of heard that in what you were saying around like giving it time to come up, giving the medicine time to land in our conscious, not just in our consciousness when we eat it or whatever, but in our field when we decide to participate in that conversation. Easy for me to say, as someone with proximity and access in the underground. So like I understand that it can be really challenging. And there was, there's a question or a note in the chat, like, what does it mean to be doing this under criminalization? And like, I think what we did in this talk is really talk about criminalization and prohibition in that context, and then also the healing. And I think there is another element there that's like, what does it mean to be practicing these things under that, like in a more kind of analytical way, maybe when Farzana invites us back the next time, I just like, I do think that it can be helpful to remember that the practices that are now, that appear to be coming out of nowhere, are in fact coming from underground, and that have been there, and that they're to maybe have like trust that those practices have existed and will continue to exist and grow. And you know, something you said earlier, Akua, really resonated with me that I'd like to reiterate, which is, or kind of iterate on, I should say, which is that something really shifted for me about 1.5 years ago when I stopped being scared of the industrialization. And I was like, whoa, like I was really worried about commercialization. And I still have a lot of very practical concerns. Consumer protection and advertising. There's like a lot of technical policy things that I'm like, we got to sort through this stuff. But I do feel like if people can grow at home and people can gather in community, then like there is no patent that can threaten that. I really sincerely in my heart believe that. So I do feel like the way that we balance out, you know, whatever our opinion is about kind of the mainstreaming and the legalization and the bringing end to the systems and so on, that can and is balanced with a lot of these kind of themes that we've been talking about like personal knowledge and personal experience, and also like the ways that we as people can maintain our sovereignty and access to care, access to medicine, access to cosmology, with the people that we are actually in community with. And that to me feels like it's a simple but beautiful kind of counterbalance to like all of the hype in the media and the stuff that's happening. And I think that, you know, one big lesson I'm learning now is that the quieter you are, the more subtle the cues you can pick up. And that's just kind of a nice reminder that it doesn't always have to be like super blast in your face all the time to learn things. So I hope that made sense. And yeah, I just have really appreciated the conversation and everyone's perspectives, and curious about how Camille's going to close this out.
Pressure. Thank you. Yeah, I actually wanted to pick up on something that's been shared in the chat around kinship. I think that this is a moment where we get to redefine what kinship is and to experiment and move towards that. And so, yes, there are things to consider with the context of prohibition, but there's a lot you can do in the privacy of your homes or places you feel safe. I think as much as there's a lot of pressure from the mainstream that you need to find a guide or you need to like work with someone who says they're an expert, I think you may be better off being with people that you really trust in a space you feel safe with some good harm reduction information. So what do I mean by this? I posted in the chat earlier something called Erowid, which was one of the first websites I ever used when I wanted to find out what dosage meant for different substances, kind of like an encyclopedia. There's lots of different stories and case studies. The main thing is just really understand what you're taking, the dosage you're taking, how long that's going to be, and being with people that you feel safe with and you feel trust with, and then developing those formats that might work for you. There's a lot online, whether it's on Double Blind, which is another magazine I posted earlier, or various platforms that can give sort of tips as to different ways you can set up a space to kind of have a sort of ceremonial or more intentional container to explore these things. I think the main piece is really, yeah, making sure you feel safe, making sure you feel in alignment for doing this, and just having a good amount of information about dosage and how to reduce harm. And yeah, and don't post about it on social media. I mean, I wouldn't be DMing people or WhatsApping people even. Like, just try and keep in mind, if you ever were kind of involved in, I don't know, activist organizing groups where they talked about digital security, just practice digital security. There is this mainstream talking about it, but it's not necessarily a good idea to be, you know, just talking really loosely about it. So just practice digital security, read up on harm reduction, and really, yeah, explore with people you feel safe with, you feel trust with. And we have a beautiful opportunity to reconnect with the plant teachers and, yeah, to grow kinship with each other and hold space for each other in ways that we might not have ever experienced before. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Those are such beautiful and rigorous also closing remarks. And I just want to really uplift that you can be looking at each of our speakers we've got their socials. We've also got lots of links, and so also look to what they're up to, what they're doing. I've learned from each one of you in different capacities, so please do look at what they're up to, and those are great spaces of study. And a lot of you will know that I really believe in that this, as Izzy, you talked about, this deep, slow study and taking time and education that also Darren spoke to. I really want to thank everyone so much for joining us on this evening, and also just to love on all our speakers. This is the first rehearsal. There will be many ongoing practices that we hope to invite you back for. So definitely that this is just the opening conversation. And yeah, just really feeling deep gratitude for each of you for the openings of cosmology and community